Welcome, everyone. This is the PartsVu Xchange Talks Boating podcast. Here we chat about all things boating with marine industry professionals and enthusiasts who spend all the time they can out on the water.
Hi, this is Tanya Becker, and I'm your host for today's episode of PartsVu Xchange Talks Boating. I'm joined by my guest, Bill Andrews, who's a great looper. It wasn't long ago that I learned about the Great Loop, and we've connected with a number of people who have completed this adventure. I'm fascinated by the journey, but even more so by how each boater approaches the adventure in very different ways. We first talked with Mike O'Malley, episode 25, entitled Exploring the Great Loop. Mike O'Malley kicks off the conversation. I wanted to next talk to Bill because I think it's fair to say he saw the loop through a unique lens, and he has some amazing stories. Bill loves history, and the cities, towns, sites, and places along the Great Loop's route tell a great deal of the story of America, especially our early days. Thanks for being with me here today, Bill.
Well, thank you, Tonya, for inviting me.
In the episode I recorded with Mike, we talked about this, but for the folks who haven't listened to that episode yet, could you describe the geographical parameters of the loop?
The loop is a 6,000-mile travel by small boat around the east coast of the United States, the Great Lakes, Mississippi River system, Gulf, and Florida. It goes through mountains and rivers and locks, and it's a great way to see the whole east coast of the United States.
When did really people, do you have any idea when people really started, setting their sights on completing the loop? I mean, I guess when did the Great Loop become a thing, or has it just been something that people have done for a long time?
I really don't know the answer to that. I heard of it. My wife was interviewing for a job in Mississippi, in Columbus, Mississippi. And I went to a marina there thinking if we moved there, I'd want to put my boat. And they told me about the loop. And so I started looking at it. I was living out in Washington State, and nobody ever talked about it out there.
Yeah, this was all very new to me. So it was, it's interesting. I'll include for the folks that are interested in really learning more about the geography of the Great Loop, I'll include a map in the show notes, a link to the map. That map was created by the America's Great Loop Cruisers Association and does really a great job of breaking down the common segments. And, it even highlights some of the best of, restaurants and sites and so forth that people might like to see. So, completing the Great Loop requires a reasonable amount of commitment and planning. I mean, what drove you to do this? Just something to do, or?
Well, my wife and I are global travelers, so we're always looking for an adventure. And I'm a lifelong boater. I grew up in Oregon and boated in Oregon, Washington, California, Nevada, and Arizona. Many of the places I boated on don't exist anymore due to volcanoes, climate change, and so on. But we lived in Massachusetts and decided that really going by car around the East Coast doesn't connect you to the spirit of the East Coast, because it was settled by water, and most of the cities are on water that is navigable. So that seemed like a really wonderful way to do it, and you don't have the traffic.
Yeah. The East Coast traffic can be a little brutal as well.
Right.
But that was interesting. Of course, that's true. When we were planning for this call to record today, you'd mentioned that many of the old cities on the East Coast were planned to be accessible by water, which of course makes all the sense in the world. I've just never thought of it that way before.
That's really how it started. And basically the loop covers 400 years of history, because the St. Augustine in Florida is the first city in North America. And then we took a side trip up to Massachusetts. So we, were at Plymouth, and where the colonies started in the 1600s. You visit places that were in the Revolutionary War in the 1700s. And then as you go around inside in the South, you see the Civil War and the Great Lakes, the industrialization of America. So it really is quite a walkabout.
Wow. So St. Augustine was the first city after the formation of the country, correct? Or?
No, it was settled by the Spanish
right.
in the 1500s.
Right.
So they were here first, yes. And then So American colonies started in Massachusetts and Virginia.
Right.
The cool thing was after the boat trip was done, I discovered that I actually had ancestors that lived in Plymouth, and not on the Mayflower, but like 20 years after the Mayflower, and also relatives in Pennsylvania and Virginia back in the 1600s and 1700s. So that made it really kind of personal after that.
It's fascinating. I mean, we think of the Plymouth narrative in the English, being the first settlers in the country, but of course that wasn't true. So
no, it's first British colony settlers, although my ancestors were exiled from Britain and came to Plymouth as religious. They were, one of them actually was in prison for 10 years in Britain for being a Puritan. So that part never gets really discussed either.
Right.
But you got to go to Salem, Massachusetts, and go to the Witch Museum. That's a social history that probably is kind of embarrassing, really.
Yeah. No, it is. I was there at that museum as a kid on a family vacation, but I'd like to go back actually with a more studied eye.
You can go there by boat and tie up right in the city and just walk up there.
Go to the museum.
Yeah.
So what kind of boat do you have, and what size boat is really necessary to complete the full loop?
Well, we had a boat that was probably on the larger end. We bought it based on the overall dimensions that would fit under the bridge. But we also bought it so we could have friends and family come along. And so this was a 55-foot power catamaran that was built by a gentleman, Victor Lipscomb, in Washington, North Carolina. And he worked with Malcolm Tennant, who is a famous sailboat designer. Malcolm has now passed away. But so this thing was, built over 10 years by one man whose passion, and he decided he wanted to do something else, so we bought it from him. And they didn't have production catamarans like this at the time. So it had a full enclosed upper deck where 10 of your friends and family can sit there while you're cruising along, and had a wine bar up there, and then three staterooms, 3 heads. It was like a 3-bedroom apartment, basically. It was designed to go offshore for months at a time. It had a normal cruise was 8 knots, and it got about almost 3 nautical miles to the gallon on diesel. So very efficient, had a range of 1,200 miles, water maker, generator, very comfortable. But we still rarely anchored out. We wanted to tie up. But so it was a little bit large, but you don't have a problem with marinas, because they all have a long dock that you tie up to. The width was a bit problematic because of if you needed to get it serviced and lifted, it was wider than most lifts, particularly up in the Northeast, where people tend to have smaller seasonal boats and pull them out. To do it, if you're going to look for a boat, look for one that's easy to work on, get enough room that you're comfortable, and however many people are going to come with you. And people will come with you if you want them to, because we had a constant stream of people riding along for a week or two. And probably at least 30 feet, sleeps 4 people, and, comfortable. You're going to be, you're going 10 miles an hour for 6,000 miles. So it takes a while.
It takes a while. And I have a hunch the nicer and more comfortable your boat, the more people that want to come along.
Oh, well, we sold the boat at the end of the loop, and a lot of these people, I haven't had an excuse to get them to fly to Tennessee, so I haven't seen them. But that was a wonderful boat. But we spent a year and a half looking for it too.
But you're near, as you said, you're near shore most of the time, when you're transversing the loop. So you bought this boat for comfort. You don't really need a boat that large, I think. That's
true. You do not need a boat that large. I know some people are going around and 20-footers, but they're not having a bunch of guests and whatnot. So that's the trade-off. If you're going to have people on your boat, they need to have space so that you're comfortable having them there. And I generally had 3 or 4 people on the boat all the time.
Right. It was a party for 6,000 miles, it sounds like.
Well, yes. My name for the trip, I don't know if you ever saw that old TV show, Route 66,
Yeah.
where the 2 guys go around in the Corvette. This is such a weird-looking boat. I called the trip River 66 because we're in this weird-looking boat. We pull into these small towns. People in America, in spite of the media coverage, are just incredibly friendly. People would come up, they look at the boat, they go, "Hey, you want to borrow my car to go to the store?" I mean, come on board, have a glass of wine. And so it was the whole of America is like that. So we have stories. We stopped at probably close to 200 places, and we have stories, very crazy stories. I mean, in the present now, plus the historical stuff, but the present people were just so nice. It was fun.
I think Americans are very friendly and good people. We just, need to set aside some of the craziness that divides us and gets everybody worked up.
Yeah. Well, the boating community, there's a lot of people who like boating, and that's a door opener. And even the boaters, having gone around there, is a very diverse group of people, much more so than if you just boat in your hometown.
Yeah, I bet. Yeah.
Because I spent a week in downtown Detroit.
Ah.
In a marina there, so you could look across the river at Canada, but it was a lovely marina, and you can walk all around the waterfront there.
Oh, what is the waterfront in Detroit like?
Well, that's their redevelopment zone, so there's new hotels and lots of restaurants and whatnot. See, that's one thing. If you drive into Detroit, you come in on the west side, and it's not so pretty that way.
Yeah.
But if you come in on the water, that's kind of the hot spot of Detroit.
Nice.
But I had been there by car many times when I lived in Indiana, so.
Right. I haven't been.
But again, seeing it by boat is better than by car.
I bet. Yeah. I haven't been to Detroit in quite a number of years now, so I need to get back. It's not very far from Chicago, so there's no reason not to go, for sure.
Yeah.
So how did you tackle the loop? In one go, or did you break it into different segments?
We did not live on the boat, so what we found with friends is that if I would schedule about 2 to 3 weeks, then people could fly in, we could all start on the boat, and then they would fly back from the other end of the trip, and we'd go 400 or 500 miles during that time, and then we'd come home for a couple of weeks. You can do one-way car rentals, and that allowed us to see inland some things that we wouldn't have seen if we'd been totally on the boat. So, we were wanting to explore the whole East. For example, we ended up driving through where James Madison plantation was, and stopped in and saw the room where the Bill of Rights was written. That was on, because rural Virginia, you probably wouldn't drive out there in your car. So, but going to and from your boat was there. And then we went to Washington's Crossing, Pennsylvania, where he crossed the river during the Revolutionary War, which I had never been to, and it was fascinating. And we got a walking tour of West Point from the basketball coach there, who was a friend of a friend. So, there's a lot of things to see, especially when you're from the West Coast, where the history is very short.
So did you do these 400 or 500 mile whatever segments, and then you would just leave the boat at a marina and then come home and then go back to that marina and continue on, it sounds like.
Right, that's what we did.
Okay.
That gave us time to do maintenance and, explore the town. Some of the places we picked were generally had enough infrastructure that you could leave it there. And I never had any problems with the boat being left. And it went through 2 hurricanes during the time I owned it when it was at the dock.
In a winter up north, I would imagine you had to pull it out, or?
Oh, yeah. So we did the loop over 2 years and a side trip to Maine. So we left it in Portland, Maine for the winter there. They have heated boat storage, and I could go up and work on it during the winter in the heated boat barn. Plus, I could eat lobster.
That's always a plus.
Well, that's why you go to Maine. To me, you eat lobster every day, sometimes twice a day.
And Maine is beautiful, in addition to the lobster, but the lobsters are definitely a perk.
Yeah, well, you can get a lobster at the grocery store. They'll cook it for you. You take it back to your boat for $8.
That's incredible. Yeah. Come to Chicago or anywhere else, you're $40, $50, $60.
Yeah.
You know.
Well, you launch your dinghy in those little fishing villages. You take your dinghy over to where the commercial boats come in, and usually there's a seafood shop at those places, and they'll sell you cooked lobsters there too. So it's how often do you get to go and get takeout in your dinghy?
Not often. Yes. You seem to really love history, and you actually created a kind of a picture book. That's not just all historical. I mean, a lot of it's just, the pictures of your wife and your friends, along your journey. But some of the photos that you included were historical places. What were some of the places that were most meaningful or interesting to you?
Oh, I made a list based on your questions, and there's probably 50 or 60 of them, because you start out in Florida. The history there is 1500 Spanish settlements, Kennedy Space Center, going to the moon, which you can take that is incredible, and I'd always wanted to go there. You get further up, you're into the Civil War, and some of the battlefields there. Washington, D.C., we did another side trip up the Potomac River, and tied up at the Capitol Yacht Club, which allows people there. And actually our boat was bow to bow with Senator Manchin's boat. But you're sitting on the back of your boat looking at the Washington Monument, having a drink. I mean, that's pretty cool. It's 150 miles up there, but it's worth it. And then you can go around and go up to Baltimore, and the Star-Spangled Banner was written by Francis Scott Key while he was captive of the British on a boat. And so the city puts up a buoy each summer where that boat was anchored. So you can actually sit there in your boat by this buoy looking back at the fort, imagining what he saw when he wrote the Star-Spangled Banner. And then you just go up, from there up through New York. We went on up through the East River, which isn't a river at all, and you go through the islands, and we stopped at Staten Island. There's a wonderful marina there. It's basically a national recreational area, just a very modern marina. Then we went up to City Island in Queens, stopped there, which is kind of a Latino neighborhood, great seafood. And then you look across the water and you see Hart Island, where 1 million people have been buried over the years from New York City, that the Potter's graves. And, I saw pictures of it with COVID where they were burying hundreds of people a day on that island. So that was a dilemma, because you see that out one side of your boat and you see City Island on the other, and then you just keep going up there. You go, through Cape Cod, take a car trip out of Cape Cod, then Plymouth, and Boston in a boat is incredible. We went in and spent 4 or 5 days in Constitutional Marina. So you're sitting on the back of your boat looking out at the USS Constitution, which is about 100 yards away. And it's a lovely, most big cities don't have nice marinas, but you can get in there, and then you just keep going up to Maine and go to Kennebunk. And Portland, Maine is incredible. And north of there's small towns with art galleries, and then you end up in Bar Harbor, or Southwest Harbor, which is the whole island there is a national park. And so they have free buses. You just get out of your boat, walk up to the road, and ride the bus around the national park. It's beautiful. And eat lobster every day.
I noticed a theme, like eating lobster is the theme of Bill's life, pretty much.
Well, life is good.
It's not terrible.
No. So I don't know. Inland. There's. It's more of the industrial history. You go through. That's 19th century, but you go through Detroit, Alpena, Michigan. There's a shipwreck museum there, and there's hundreds of shipwrecks on the east side of Michigan, and they have this museum with a glass-bottom boat to go to. It's a little town. You wouldn't think of it, but that is definitely worth a stop. Mackinac Island, Charlevoix on Michigan on the west side was one of our favorite places. The boating in the Great Lakes was actually probably the hardest part of the whole trip. Lake Erie is very shallow, and we got caught in some 20-foot waves there. Luckily, we were lined with them. And then Michigan, we were stuck in Charlevoix for 5 days because the water was turned up. There were 20-foot waves out there, too. But they were more like ocean swells because Lake Michigan is very, very deep. But the people in Charlevoix, you go in there, they have a farmer's market in this park that's right at the edge of the marina. You can go out and they'll make you crepes, and we had the best cherry pie ever. And then we went back up there, a couple months later, and this woman, Farmer White, makes cherry pies. We called them up, and she actually made a pie for us, and we picked it up when she was closed for the winter. So, just really nice people.
People do underestimate. I'm a Midwestern girl, so I've spent my my life currently basically live on Lake Michigan, or near, and it's people underestimate the Great Lakes. It's Lake Michigan. All of them, but certainly Lake Michigan, I can attest to strongly, is nothing to take lightly.
Yeah, well, on the Mississippi River too, we went down through Hammond, and then because we were too tall to go through Chicago, on boat, which I hadn't figured. I didn't plan that properly, but I've taken that tour, the boat ride in Chicago, and that's worth it too. But that Mississippi River, even having been in the Columbia River in Oregon, which is the second largest river, but that Mississippi is tricky. There was probably a 10-knot current because it was in flood stage with giant logs, and we were hauling down there. But you got to read Huckleberry Finn and Tom Sawyer when you're going down there. But there's a lot less infrastructure because the thing floods all the time. So there's fewer cities there. But then you stop in a place like Beardstown, Illinois, is where Abraham Lincoln did the Farmer's Almanac trial. But you pull up there, the dock is a barge that they service tugboats there, and you walk into the town, and there's this museum where he tried this case, which is apparently quite famous. It was 2 years before he was president of the United States. So, and I didn't know about that. We just happened on it, and it was fun. I don't know. It's the distances between places to stop on the river are quite long, though, and there are some parts of it you have to anchor. There are no places to stop, and it's because the water goes up and down. So some people take the Mississippi all the way down to New Orleans. We decided not, because it's 500 miles where there's no marinas because the water's so wild. There's maybe one marina at Memphis, Tennessee, but other than that, you're on. So most people go up the Ohio River and then down the Ten Tom through the Kentucky Lake, which is about 100-mile long, beautiful, incredibly beautiful lake. If you go down that way, you got to stop at Camden, Tennessee, which has the only freshwater pearl farm in America. They grow them in little mussels in this backwater, and the it's a place where Patsy Cline's plane crashed and she died near Camden. So, but they had a car there. They just left the keys in it. So if you wanted to go to town, you just get in the car and drive to town. They didn't worry about it. and go to the Pearl Museum, of course.
Right. Yeah, exactly. So did you?
Then you can swim with the manatees down in the
Oh.
in Crystal, Florida. There, you can get in the water with them with your mask on and touch the manatees, which was pretty interesting. And then Steinhatchee it's on the northern part of Florida there. It's they call it a drinking town with a fishing problem.
The drinking is not the problem. Fishing is the problem.
Yes. And then you got to go to St. Petersburg. There's 20 art museums there, which St. Petersburg we love anyway. And you can tie your boat up right in town and motor up there. That's in Tampa. I mean, and then you end up, we cross through the swamp through Fort Myers, and then it ended up in Stewart.
Oh wow, great! So you can cross the swamp in a boat that large, and it's
yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
It's shut down right now for the locks, but there's a few locks. But I don't know if you ever dreamed of seeing a group of snakes swimming across in front of you. 5 and 6 foot long snakes. That happens. and alligators.
Yes, I've seen many alligators in Florida.
Yeah. Well, when you have a catamaran, they like to go underneath between the two hulls and come out and say hi to you in the back.
Oh Lord.
Which is yeah. Well, they want to they're begging for food.
Yes. Yeah. Exactly. So were you? So I know you had friends, fly in and out and join you on different segments of the trip. Did you travel with other boats, or did you just travel, pretty much alone?
Well, on the East Coast, there's so many boaters that we met a few loopers, but not very many. We traveled with boats though, starting down the river system from Lake Michigan. We started seeing more people coming down or around the top of Michigan there, because we didn't go through up into Canada canals, and those people pop out and join up at the top of Michigan. So we started meeting people, and then we definitely grouped up to go down through the locks, because the scheduling and getting through the locks is a bit tricky. There's a lot of commercial traffic there. So the loop for us was not going through the Canadian canal system, was 69 locks, some of which were built over 100 years ago, so it can be kind of slow. The Erie Canal is old.
What advice would you have for boaters out there who might be interested in thinking about or tackling completing the Great Loop?
Well, plan ahead. I'd say first and foremost, do it. Yes. I really enjoyed the heck out of it, and I've been on boats all over the world. But plan and train. We met people who had just never owned a boat, bought one, and started out, and they ended up getting stuck for repairs a few times and having some minor accidents. We never saw anybody who got really bad, but think about the boat ride. If you're going to think about it like it's a car ride, only in a boat. So you don't focus on your car when you're taking a road trip in America. You got to be comfortable enough with your boat that you're aware and thinking about where you're going, because the boat's the same no matter where you go. And so planning where you're going to go, and so when I was home, I'd spent probably 2 or 3 days of that time at home planning the next segment, getting reservations at the marina, talking to the people at the marina on what there was to do, and getting ready to go, and of course getting my friends lined up. So I had friends flying from the West Coast and East Coast, all over the place, Midwest, and well, we had at Hammond we had we had a wine tasting on the back of the boat for 10 people, and they drove up. We lived in Fort Wayne, so they drove up from Fort Wayne and from around Chicago there, and we just drank wine on the back of the boat. So you gotta plan these things, though.
That's right. And you have to plan where to get the next lobster. Like lobster
Yes.
and wine. This is Bill's life.
There was no lobster in Indiana.
No. Yeah, that's true. Thanks so much for being here today, Bill. This has been such a fascinating conversation, and I'm intrigued by each of you who decide to undertake this adventure. For people interested in learning more about the Great Loop, I'd encourage joining a Facebook group to connect with experienced loopers. There are a couple great groups out there, and I've included links in the show notes. Also, Bill and his wife have shared the picture book they put together after their completion of the Great Loop. And it's a fabulous insight into the fun they had, some of the sights they saw. So I'd encourage you to take a look at that. I'd also encourage people to consider joining the America's Great Loop Cruisers Association. Membership is $89 a year, I believe, and they have a lot of great resources. Thanks again, Bill.
Yep, and let me say thank you again, and I recommend the America's Great Loopers Cruisers Association. We were members on the trip, and getting all those other navigation aids that you can see on your phone and whatnot too.
Thanks for tuning in to this episode of the PartsVu Xchange Talks Boating podcast. Are you in a dock war with your boating neighbor for the cleanest boat? Check out our marine soaps, polishes, waxes, and more at PartsVu.com. And for free shipping, use the coupon code PVTalksShine, a special perk for our podcast listeners. Follow us on Facebook and Instagram for boating knowledge, to keep in touch with the PartsVu community, and for special sales and promotions. Don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review this podcast, and check out the show notes for the coupon code just mentioned, more information about PartsVu and the products we offer, as well as our boating blog, the PartsVu Xchange. And a big thanks to Mind for performing the original music featured within this podcast.